right, another great episode of The Game Plan, this time with former MLS goalkeeper turned real estate investor Dan Kennedy. We've got 8 minutes on the clock. Let's get into this week's partner rundown. Jay, how do you think athletes should approach investing into real estate?
Yeah, so Dan and other guests have made this point that when athletes get involved in real estate, what they think is actually getting passive income doesn't turn out to be that passive after all. They're spending a lot of their time sourcing these opportunities, sourcing these deals. They're spending a lot of time as landlords of this business. And they're putting a lot of capital and time up front, which doesn't really leave them opportunities to go do other things in retirement. The challenge with that is, as an athlete, you're making the bulk of your money by the time you're 30. And so now the reason real estate investing is so popular with athletes is they are taking that lump sum payment and turning it into something that they can make back over the next, let's say 20, 25 years in rent payments. As those mortgages start falling off, they start to actually build some equity in the business. That's all great, but Dan made the point that if you're going to go in there as a real estate investor, look at it like a portfolio approach. Instead of putting $1 million into one apartment in one market, potentially work with a manager that's going to have done the work up front for you. Sure, you're paying some management fees, but you get a much more diversified portfolio.
Yeah, the idea of an athlete going out there, or really anyone, and you have to buy a new air conditioning unit or a new fridge or hire a handyman to fix the toilets in the unit that you own. I think pretty quickly you have a wake-up call of like, what have I gotten myself into? And you're not going to experience economies of scale on that until you own and manage a series of properties. And so, athletes got enough going on early on in their career, just focus on what's going on the court or on the field. So to get into passive real estate investing is a great option for them where they don't have to worry about all that management fee. Yes, it comes with fees. There's a challenge with that, but they can get access to great funds like Dan's or others because of who they are, and they should leverage that so they can start to get some of that passive income. And then by the time they retire, to your point, they're getting checks versus, let's store it all away till I'm retired when I'm when I'm 50 or 60 years old, like the rest of us try to build wealth for the long term. They have a lifestyle they want to continue, and so it goes.
Yeah, and Dan worked for the LA Galaxy before he became a real estate investor, and you and I know firsthand the expectation reality gap, having both worked at teams and leagues. So, Tim, tell me, what are some insights from your time there?
Yeah, so look, that first day when you roll up to the facility and you realize you're working for an NFL team like I was when I was 23, it's awesome. It's great. You put the logo on your shirt. For me, it was a little odd because I'm a diehard Packers fan, and here I am wearing a Lions symbol. So maybe that's one insight is like, if you're going to get into it and work for a team, make sure it's a team that you're super passionate about. But what I saw was the money flows to the players and the owners, and the people around me were working 60, 70 hours a week, and they had been there for decades, and they were willing to make a sacrifice because they were fans first, really, and then employees of these teams. So I think there's so many other ways to get into sport and sports business, and that's the path in my career that I ended up taking, which I was really happy about.
I think the brand value of working in sports is there. Look, I'm very grateful for the 3 seasons that I spent working at the NFL. And to this day, I think it opens up opportunities for me because of the network that I built there and the close relationships I still keep with some of my colleagues who are still there. But the biggest thing that surprised me, especially those of us that followed tech companies and sort of came up in this generation of technology and innovation, is how conservative and frankly slow to move teams and leagues are when it comes to new innovation. You hear about this idea of protect the shield. Well, why is that? Because they've built this brand over many generations. They have ownership stakes from 32 different teams. So every decision has to go through multiple layers of approval. NFL teams, NFL leagues, and I think most sports teams and leagues in general don't have the mentality of move fast and break things. And so when you're coming in as somebody young and you're saying, I want to work with these startups, I want to bring these companies to bear, let's try to do something innovative with technology, it's a lot harder to get that through. And that was a big expectation reality gap for me.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of one thing I definitely want to hit on, which is the expansion of Major League Soccer. By 2023, the league will have added 10 teams in 10 years. Do you think that expansion is good for the growth of the game or bad?
Well, Tim, if you look back at the last 5 years, I think in 2015, when an expansion team was coming into the MLS, it cost $100 million. I think the last 28th and 29th team cost about $200 million, and it looks like the next set of teams is going to cost $325 million. So clearly the value of the MLS teams is going up, and on the whole, it's a good idea for there to be more teams because that's more opportunities for players who played at the youth level to go pursue their dreams pro, right? There's 3 million youth soccer participants in the US. More seats means more opportunity. The challenge is that the more teams you add doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a quality of product, and also doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be enough salary for folks to pursue their dreams professionally. MLS salaries just haven't gone up at the rate that some of the other leagues have thanks to the media rights, and it's a challenge when you keep adding more mouths to feed.
Yeah, I would say the most concerning thing for me is definitely the quality of the product on the field. Now, I'll give the MLS some credit because they've started to really push this idea of youth development academies for each team, as well as encouraging teams to look outside of the U.S. for talent. And teams like Atlanta United have done a good job tapping into Central America and South America for talent. But when you add more teams, there's only a finite amount of resources for those teams. And I worry that I'm not hearing enough about how MLS is going to focus on and leverage the World Cup in 2026, for example. There's been this kind of split between U.S. soccer and the MLS, and I think that that's really bad for the growth of the game here in the States. I think they need to figure out a way to work together, and they need to make sure that this upcoming World Cup does the same thing for soccer in the U.S. that the original one back in '92 did when the league came out of that.
No, that's a great point, Tim. One thing I want to make sure we hit on, because it was big news this week, was that Diageo announced their acquisition of Ryan Reynolds' Aviation Gin for a whopping $610 million, $335 up front, and then the rest in earnouts. I want to hear, how did it go down with you?
Well, look, every celebrity, every athlete, everyone I've ever talked to always has this big aspiration to create a brand. Hey, look at what George Clooney did with Casamigos. I can go do that. Look at what Rihanna's done with Fenty. I can go do that. Okay. Let's see you go do it. Now, kudos to Ryan Reynolds and his team because he dug in, he invested his capital, he invested his time, and most of all, he put his brand on the line to see this acquisition happen, to see Aviation Gin take off. So easier said than done. I don't know the economics of it, but clearly Diageo is happy with how Casamigos has played out for them, and they're hoping that this can be another success just as big as that one.
I think your point about skin in the game cannot be stressed enough. A lot of folks want to come in. We've heard the wave of celebrity investors and the value add that celebrity investors bring. And I think what's been played out over the last decade is actually most of them don't bring that much value. But when you start to create skin in the game and you start to say, hey, there is meaningful equity ownership here that is vesting the way it would for a normal, your CTO vests the same way that Ryan Reynolds does. And you start to look at the way that the involvement of these celebrities with skin in the game starts to create a halo effect around the brand. We talk about community first growth on this show a ton. And the problem with it is building a community takes a long time. So if you're an upstart D2C brand and you can find a cult figure or somebody who really embodies the values of your brand and you start to build a community around them and around their aura, and then you've got the distribution and you've got a really quality product, well, that sounds like a great cocktail for success. It's just unfortunate that not everybody can make it happen.
Wow, I was 100% with you till you dropped that pun. No, but it's a great point, as all your points were. Jay, thanks for joining me on this partner rundown. I'll see you next week.
I'm going to go have a drink.